Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friday Night Live. I hope this is working. I think I start every single live off by saying that. If anyone's there, do drop me a message, and hopefully, hopefully someone will be there. It doesn't look too hopeful at the moment. Um, Unless I'm misreading this, nobody is watching. Um, anyway, crack on and see how things go. I've got hello, Dawn. That's good. You're here at least. So three of us by the looks of it. Might as well have just done a Teams call and done it that way. Oh dear. Okay. Well, anyway, there we go. If anyone's got any questions, pop them in. I've got 3 questions to be getting on with. So if anyone's got any questions, put them in the chat. If not, it's going to be a nice early finish. Right, so question 1. I am past the 2-month mark and I'm feeling very confident I won't drink alcohol in the future. When the thought comes across my mind, I just remember what it makes me feel like at night and the next day. However, being that I feel confident, is it normal to have a shred of worry in the back of my mind saying, I hope I don't slip up? So I think it's perfectly normal. And I've, thanks, Dornia, I'm not mute, which is an improvement on a previous live I did, 45 minutes with the microphone turned off. So anyway, get back to the question. So absolutely, I think it's perfectly normal. A lot of people have messaged me to say that, really confident, really happy to have stopped drinking. But kind of that niggling thing at the back of their mind, just kind of a bit worried about it. Not only is it normal, I think it's a good thing to have because I think you can become overconfident. And of course, I deal in the books with fading effect bias and the concept of ambition, two phenomenons whereby you can become your sobriety can actually weaken over time. It's the usual thing with drug addiction, smoking, drinking, whatever it is. The way we approach it is, yeah, you stop, and the longer you stop for, the easier it gets, and eventually it's fine. But of course, it doesn't always work that way. Fading effect bias is where we look back on past events more positively than when they occurred. And ambition is a where we as humans tend to be critical of what we've got and idolize what we don't have. So when we stop drinking, we tend to take our sobriety for granted and start idolizing what it was like to drink. So I think it's actually very good that you have that in the back of your mind. I think that's a fairly good mix, to be honest. So yeah, that sounds good. Second question. After reading your books, it shed a whole new light on the situation of alcohol dependency. It was like click, the light went on, which made a huge impact on me and my decision to quit drinking. I thought to myself, if I ever did drink again, I don't know if anything could make such an impression to motivate me to stop again. Then I read Jason Vale's book, in which he states, if you do drink again, this book will do you no good to stop because it will not have the same effect twice. Do you believe that about your books? To a degree, yes, because I think there is a kind of a mechanism or dynamic, if you like, whereby when people start to question their drinking and start to get sick of it and just get sick of waking up feeling tired and exhausted and miserable all the time, um, they want to stop. Okay, there's a part of them that wants to carry on, of course, but a part of them that wants to stop. So they're kind of like a dog straining at the leash to a degree. Part of them certainly is really keen to stop. So then they can pick up a book, and it can help them see things in a whole different way. And what they thought they couldn't live without, they're suddenly not only able to live without, but very happy to not live without. And it can totally turn things on their head. So it's kind of like a springboard. And between that determination and that enthusiasm and the book being like this wow thing, not just my book, any quit lit book, if it's doing its job properly, that can be a really good launch into sobriety. So you go in really fired up and really keen to get stuck into it. If you then start drinking again, I think a few things happen. Firstly, reading the book again, providing you absorbed it all in the first place, it's not going to have that massive impact that it did in the first place. But also, don't forget that we're very good at making excuses and sort of convincing ourselves that what we're doing is the right thing, particularly when it comes to drug addiction and we want to keep doing it. So we start making excuses. So what you might find is a lot of what's in the book, you start to kind of make excuses to yourself about why it doesn't apply to me, or, whatever that might be. So I think there is definitely a dynamic whereby a book may not have the same impact the second time round. Um, but I think it's true to say of Alcohol Explained, it does cover quite a lot. So there's like 33 chapters in the first book, and I forget 20 odd in the second book. Um, and they're quite short, quite to the point. One of them's one of them's like a paragraph or two paragraphs. I think I only just struggled to get onto the second page because I'm kind of someone who, if I have something to say, I say it and I'm done. I don't necessarily repeat it or go over it over and over again. So some of the chapters are extremely short. So I think it's one of the books that probably benefits from a second read anyway, because I think particularly, if you want to stop drinking, you pick up a book. I know I certainly do this with self-help books. I have a tendency to rush through them because it's not like a novel where there's a great deal of pleasure in the actual reading of it. It's a means to an end. You want to quit drinking, you want to lose weight, you want to quit smoking, whatever it is. So there can be a tendency to hurry through and miss things. So I think it's probably worthwhile reading through it again, and it might not necessarily be the same. I mean, I stopped smoking eventually using Alan Carr's books, but it took years and multiple rereads. And I think a lot of these things, you get a lot out of them on a second read anyway. Just have a look at the comments. Hello, everyone. I hope someone's got some questions because I've got one more question to do, and that's me. So even think of something to say, please. Otherwise, I'll be off in a couple of minutes. I was recently tapering off, so this might be a factor, but I've just listened to the chapter in Alcohol Explained 2 on cravings, and I realised that the craving is an emotional trigger within me, and it renders me incapable of rational thought. Temporarily, it seems. Is there a way that where I can send back an emotional response to counter it? For me, fear of death and negative consequences just don't do it, unfortunately. So there's a few things there. Tapering is inherently difficult. Okay, it's kind of a form of moderation, albeit short term, because you're cutting down what you normally drink. The reason people usually give for it is kind of fear of negative consequences of stopping for health reasons, so like DTs or life-threatening seizures. But frankly, if you're in that category, you're far better off speaking to a medical professional and getting some actual medication to help you through the withdrawals than trying to taper. The other reason people try and taper is because they kind of think it's a stepping stone to stopping. But it isn't. Cutting down actually makes it harder to stop in many ways. So let's go back to the basic dynamic. You drink alcohol, which is a sedative, and your brain reacts to that by becoming hypersensitive, so it can work under the stating effects of the alcohol. And when the alcohol wears off, there's that corresponding, there's that period of chemical imbalance, kind of like over anxiety, that kicks in. And that's essentially what the withdrawal is. But of course, withdrawal on its own doesn't make addiction. What makes the addiction is when your brain starts to realize that that unpleasant feeling is there and associates it with another drink. Okay. The withdrawal, be it from cigarettes or alcohol or anything else, is an unpleasant feeling. Okay. But there's lots and lots of reasons in life why we might feel unpleasant. You might have a bad day at work, argument with partner, the kids are playing up, money problems. You might just wake up one day feeling rubbish, which everyone does for no discernible reason. Never really find out why. And most of the time when we feel bad, we just get on with things. We just carry on plodding through the business of the day and do what we need to do. So that unpleasant feeling caused by the withdrawal doesn't make the addiction. What makes the addiction is through repeated use, through constantly taking a drug, our subconscious learns that another dose of the drug will remove that unpleasant feeling. Okay. And that for me is where the problems really start to kick in, because no matter how much you've had to drink, after about 20 minutes, half an hour, it starts to wear off. And from there on after, your brain will interpret that unpleasant feeling as, I want another drink. So in that way, every drink causes a desire for the next one. When you're at that stage, it's far easier to just quit than cut down, because what you're doing by taking a drink, you're instigating the withdrawal, but then trying not to have the next one. So it's an incredibly difficult thing to do anyway. So I'm slightly concerned about tapering, because, as I say, if you're using it because you're drinking at an extremely high level and you're worried about life-threatening withdrawal, then you, as I say, you're far better off going to a doctor and getting some medication for that, which will do you much, much better than taking yet more alcohol. And if you're doing it as a stepping stone, it just doesn't work that way, because what you'll find is you'll have a drink, you'll want the next one even more, but because you can't have one, you just start to spiral. And that, I think, is where those really powerful cravings are coming from. They're driven by the withdrawal, because you're trying to taper off. Because in a normal drinking session, when you're drinking as much as you like, you're just throwing it down your neck, and getting more and more inebriated, but constantly chasing away that withdrawal feeling. So the other point there is, for cravings, it doesn't matter whether it's an emotional trigger or anything else. The fact of the matter is, the trigger just puts the thought of a drink in your mind. So whether it's emotional, or you're out socializing, or whatever it is, the thought of a drink goes into your mind, and it's what you do after that that is the issue. Because if you start fantasizing about how nice it would be to have a drink and how miserable you are without one, you will be unhappy, and you will be craving a drink. If you think to yourself either, well, I don't drink, I'm not having one, I'm not even thinking about it, or you just think how lucky you are to be free, or, and this is what I did, and this was actually going back to the first question, and this is something I found incredibly useful, is you just take something you really hate about drinking, and there's an awful lot of things. The thing I hated the most was waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning, really tired but unable to get back to sleep. And again, obviously, that's caused by that chemical imbalance, that overstimulation that kicks in when the alcohol's worn off. And if you bring that to mind every time you think of a drink, instead of fantasizing about it, you can deal with the cravings quite effectively that way. So right, let's have a look and see what the questions are. Right, one thing I was hoping for with giving up alcohol was losing weight. It hasn't happened yet. So a few things there. How long have you quit for? Because I personally found it was about a 3-month period, when I've always been someone who wanted to eat takeaways all the time. And about 3 months after I stopped drinking, that urge kind of just strangely petered out. It just disappeared. So I was at about the 3-month stage. So it might be that you just haven't quite got there yet. The other thing is, alcohol does cause you to be overweight for lots and lots of reasons. There's loads of empty calories in alcoholic drinks. So I think beer has something like 200 and something calories. So like, have a couple of beers with your dinner, and it's the equivalent of like topping off your meal with a Big Mac. It's huge amounts of calories in there. But what it also does, it's an appetite stimulant, which may sound counterintuitive, because I've just been talking about alcohol being a sedative, but not when you start to understand how the human digestive system works. Because when you eat something, you've got something like 20 foot of digestive tract that the food needs to go through. And there's muscles in the digestive system that squeeze it all the way. So eating is actually really exhausting, because a lot of your energy is diverted into digestion. And that's why we feel very heavy and very tired after a big meal. So what happens is, your body often, it triggers off feelings of hunger when you're sat down and resting, because it perceives that that's a good time to digest. So actually, it's sedative things that relax us that increase our hunger. So alcohol's got a huge amount of empty calories, and it makes you hungry, and it anesthetizes senses that make you feel full. So for all those reasons, you eat more, and you just tend to not feel it. So you're able to eat a lot more. It also erodes your fitness. Okay, it increases your heart rate, which makes you feel tired and lethargic. So you're less able to exercise. So there's all these different reasons. There's loads of them, actually. I think they're on the website. I've ended up listing about 9 of them on the website. There's another one where alcohol is an energy source for humans, but it can't be stored, which is why we get hot when we drink, because there's all this energy coming in from the alcohol, and your body can't do anything with it. It has to burn it off. But because it's got an excess of energy, because of all the alcohol it's trying to get rid of, virtually anything you eat is turned into fat. So there's all these different reasons. But the problem is, having said all of that, weight loss, it's very simplest. If you consume more energy than you're burning off, you will gain weight. Okay, so if you quit drinking, and a lot of people do this, they start eating loads of sugary food, and quite rightly think to themselves, I've quit drinking, I can treat myself to a takeaway or something. That's fine. But of course, if you're eating lots of calories, you're not going to lose weight. So that's what I would say is look at what you're eating, because if you've given up alcohol but kind of then replaced it with emotional eating, you're not going to lose weight. But also, if you're in very early days, it might be worth giving it a bit longer anyway. Any ideas around close family members who may be triggering, apart from killing them off? Well, that was going to be my immediate suggestion, or of course smashing them in the face with a rock or something. I think what you need to do is see these people for what they are. Seeing people drink alcohol for me is not triggering at all, because it's foul. Okay, so when I see people drinking alcohol, I don't envy them, because it's disgusting. When I see them drinking alcohol, I see them waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and being heavy and exhausted all the next day, but with that kind of underlying feeling of anxiety that only alcohol can give. And I just don't envy them at all. Plus, I think if you're with people who are drinking, they're idiots. That's the problem. You can take some genuinely decent people, but when they've had a few drinks, they're just genuinely irritating and unpleasant. So I don't. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking actually, or just close family members who are just incredibly irritating. Someone once said to me that someone had really annoyed them, and they'd thought about drinking, but then they thought, why on earth should I make myself miserable just because they've upset me? And I think that's maybe what you want to start thinking to yourself. If people are just irritating you, why would you want to have a drink and feel even more miserable just because they've done that? My sleep pattern is bad. I'm only on day 3. When will I start to notice a difference? Yeah, it will be more than 3 days. So sleep is a very interesting one. I've already talked about the dynamic whereby you drink alcohol, and your brain seeks to counter the sedating effect. So there's a period of overstimulation afterwards. So when you are drinking, it interferes with your natural sleeping patterns. Now, there's lots we humans don't understand about sleeping, but what we do know is that you go through different sleep cycles. And one of the main differentiating factors between those sleep cycles is how deeply unconscious you are. So there's something called deep sleep, where, as you can probably imagine, you're very deeply unconscious. But then on the other end of the scale, there's something called REM sleep, which is where your brain lights up almost as if you're fully awake. And that's where we dream. It's a crucial part of our sleeping cycle. But of course, when you drink alcohol, because you're sedated, your brain struggles to get you into that REM sleep. And that's why people who drink are always tired. A load of people went out from work today and they were like, oh no, I'm fine, I'm just a bit tired. That's the drink that's done that. Even if you just have 1 or 2, you interrupt your normal sleeping pattern. It really is that simple. But the problem is sleep is a habit. Okay, so if you set your alarm for 3 in the morning for a week, and get up and go to toilet at that time, and then on the 8th day you don't set your alarm, you will still wake up at that time needing the toilet, because humans are creatures of habit. If you've been drinking for a while and ruining your sleep consistently, it will take you quite a few days to get back into a normal sleeping pattern. If you've been drinking quite heavily, day 3, your brain chemistry is not even quite back to normal, let alone are you starting to get back into normal sleeping patterns. And then, of course, when you do get back into a normal sleeping pattern, you can have days or even weeks of feeling really tired because you're finally catching up on that lost sleep. So you should see a difference fairly soon, but give it sort of, I expect things will change to you quite drastically over the next 3 or 4 days. And you'll start finding you're sleeping more. And as I say, you might find you get incredibly tired, which lasts for a few weeks sometimes. I'm coming up to 2 years without a drink. Well done. My question to you is, do you still get the chimp popping up every so often, and how do you get rid of him? Um, so for me, I think you need to get very clear in your mind the difference between the idea of something and the reality, because quite often in life, the idea of doing something far surpasses the reality of doing it. Because going back to what I spoke to about before, we humans are very good at idolizing what we don't have. Okay, so when you're looking forward to something or you're thinking about doing something, you idolize it, you make it out to be way, way better than it is. Um, and that's particularly true of alcohol, because when you think of having an alcoholic drink, you think of like something really cold and tasty and pleasant that makes you feel relaxed and happy and good. But that's not the reality of having an alcoholic drink. It might have been the reality of having an alcoholic drink 3 or 4 times out of your life, and it wasn't the drink that was to blame, it was probably the pleasant circumstances you were in. Um, what it will do is taste foul, accelerate your heart rate, make you feel slightly dulled, ruin your sleep. And if you committed to stopping drinking and you finally have a drink, you'll probably feel extremely guilty and miserable on top of that. So it will be an out and out unpleasant experience. So that's how you do it. You need to start in your mind recognizing the difference between the idea of something and the reality of it. I can see my REM sleep is increasing on my Garmin app. Is there an optimal time for, say, 8 hours sleep? I could read that question in so many different ways. Is there an optimal time for 8 hours sleep at night? That would be a good time for 8 hours sleep. Or are you asking what's an optimal time for REM? What I would say is these Fitbits and Garmins, what they do, they register your heart rate, I think, and movement. And from that, they deduce what your sleeping pattern is. So if your heart rate goes up a bit and you're moving around a bit more, it will say it's REM sleep. If you're very, your heart rate really drops, it will determine that it's deep sleep. That is not 100% accurate, as you can probably imagine. You have to have like sensors attached to your brain and be monitored on massive machines to actually know exactly what sleep cycles you're in. So I wouldn't get too bogged down in it. I would simply say, do you feel good when you wake up? Because of course we're all different as well. Someone might need 7 cycles of REM sleep, someone might need 2, someone might go into it for 5 minutes, someone might go into it for half an hour. To a degree, you just have to trust your brain is doing what it needs to do, which it will do if you're not pumping a load of chemicals into it, which disturbs how it works. So keep drug free, and see how you feel in the mornings. I think if you're waking up feeling good, then that's pretty much all you need to ask. What do you suggest in early days, or generally if there is a bolt desire to buy alcohol when in a shop? It's like an old trained automatic behavior that needs overriding, but how do you avoid this? Well, you're going to come across alcohol in shops, you're going to see it in pubs and bars and everything. Um, there's no It's not like an automated reaction. It's not like flicking the indicator on when you're going to turn in a car. It's a conscious decision. I'm in a shop. Oh, that looks, I'll buy some alcohol. And that process is just a simple craving process, isn't it? You see the alcohol and you start thinking about whether to buy it or not. The simplest way to do it is, as I said, I've talked a bit about how to deal with cravings. But of course, another way to deal with cravings is certainty, because this is one of the key things, and this is what people sometimes talk about spontaneous sobriety, where people can be very heavy drinkers and they just stop. A lot of that is down to certainty, because let's go back to what cravings are. They are a thought process whereby you firstly fantasize about having a drink, and then you can move on to a second stage of it where you almost tease yourself with the possibility of it. That's when you move from thinking about it as an abstract to thinking, I could have a drink, couldn't I? Could I just have one tonight, or just on this one occasion, or whatever it is. And that makes it even worse, because if you're hungry and you're thinking about food, that's not a very pleasant place to be. But if you're hungry and the food's in front of you, or you've ordered something and you're watching them arrive on the app, that's when it becomes really unbearable, when it's like almost there. So that's what you're doing. You're kind of teasing yourself with it and dangle it in front of yourself like a carrot on a stick. Certainty is a very good way of demolishing that, because if you know in your heart of hearts you're not going to take a drink, you're far less likely to fantasize about it, and you certainly won't enter into that realm of, oh yes, I could on just this one occasion. um, and that's one of the big differentiators for people who just pack it in and have done with it. It's that certainty in their mind that they are not going to do it again. And I appreciate that's a bit of a kind of chicken and egg situation, because how do you get the certainty? That can be a very difficult place to go into. But again, that is just about reversing our beliefs about alcohol, because it's our beliefs about it that keep drawing us in. We believe we enjoy it, it tastes good, it makes us feel good. More importantly than that, really, we believe we have to have it. We believe we're not going to enjoy a holiday without it. We believe we can't socialize without it. We believe we can't go, what would Christmas be like without alcohol? And it becomes very, very difficult. So that certainty can destroy. So changing your beliefs about things so that you don't need it to socialize, you don't need it to enjoy holidays, you don't need it to enjoy Christmas, you don't need it at all. In fact, life's far better without it. That in and of itself can give you the certainty, which then leads to those being able to deal with those cravings. Where are we? 2 months in, well done. I hark back to an unreal past of happily drinking. That's exactly what fading effect bias is. It's looking back on things with a rose-tinted spectacles, basically. And that's it. So our last question. So if no one puts any more questions in, this is my last one. So pop something in if you want. Are alcohol-free drinks advisable? So I like alcohol-free beers. Okay, what I noticed the other day, which is a bit worrying, I think two separate people posted in the group. One of them had a picture of a cider that was 1%, and someone else had bought a supposed alcohol-free drink that was 1%. So in the UK and Europe, to be alcohol-free, it has to have either obviously 0% alcohol in it or 0.05, which is incredibly low. In America, it's slightly different. It has to be 0.5, okay, which is still low. And you hear all this, oh, right, banana, blah, blah, blah. But your body digests bananas very differently to how it ingests fluids. The problem is when you're drinking heavily, your body gets used to the amount of alcohol you drink. This is the issue with low alcohol drinks, right? And even again, one of the issues with moderation. So if I drink 2 bottles of wine every night, okay, when I sit down of an evening at 6 or 7 o'clock and have that first glass of wine, that sends a message to my brain that 2 bottles of wine are incoming. So my brain starts on that recalibration process to recalibrate in the expectation of 2 bottles of wine's worth of alcohol. Okay, this is why when people drink heavily and try and cut back, they sometimes can't sleep at all, because their brain is recalibrating to 2 bottles of wine, but they've only had a glass. So they jump from being, well, they're not going to be normal because, they will be still suffering from the day before's drinking, but from being whatever base level they have to feeling really anxious and unpleasant almost immediately. So what we're trying to avoid when we stop drinking is, yes, there will be small amounts of alcohol you can be having. In fact, you can't avoid it because your gut contains billions of bacteria, healthy bacteria, and one of their waste products is alcohol. So everyone has a baseline of alcohol in their blood, which is why when police have blood tests, it's never 0% alcohol, because no one has 0% alcohol in their bloodstream. So very, very, very small amounts of alcohol don't do anything. But when you have a particular amount, a spike, your brain can perceive that as, oh, wow, here comes all that alcohol again, and start to recalibrate. So the next question is, well, what's the correct amount to have? And the answer is nobody knows, because firstly, it will differ between person and person. Because if you've got someone who's, 6 stone, hasn't eaten for a week and just run 3 back-to-back marathons and they have a drink, it's going to affect them very differently than if you've got someone who's 25 stone and just eaten 3 large pizzas. It's going to be very different experience. But I think what concerns me with these sort of low alcohol drinks is it almost causes a stepping stone back for people. I can really see how you could quit drinking and have a 0.05, you'll find a zero point 0.5, then there's a 1. And at what point do you kind of forget the physical, but you kind of slip back into it? And of course, the other concern is 1%, is that going to be enough to trigger a reaction? It could well be. 0.5%, I don't know. So everyone needs to do their own thing, but I try to have, when I drink alcohol free, I make sure it is alcohol free, i.e. it's 0.0%. Which my favorite alcohol free beer is Peroni, and that is 0.0. And the other one I quite like is Bavaria, and again it's just 0.0. There's nothing in there. I do occasionally have the other ones when they're there. A lot of people say they're triggering. Triggers are just things that put the thought of an alcoholic drink in your head. And if your sobriety is based on never being triggered, then you've already failed, because there's an awful lot of alcohol in the world and you will come across it. It's not the trigger that is the problem. It's what you do with the trigger, what you do with that thought. Do you start fantasizing about it and thinking about it and considering having a drink? Or do you just remind yourself how grim it was to be waking up at 4 a.m. riddled with anxiety? The other thing with alcohol-free drinks, some people become unstuck because they literally replace alcohol with alcohol-free drinks. So they expect to be able to guzzle loads and loads of alcohol-free drinks and somehow it to be some kind of crux and make them feel better. It may have a psychological impact, but without the sedative, there's no drug in there. So it's a lot of the time not doing what they want. But again, that's not necessarily a problem with the alcohol-free drink. It's how they've approached stopping drinking. Regarding pause, do you know what determines who will suffer from it? I was not a heavy drinker, but drank for 37 years, sober 4 months, and have fatigue and lack of motivation. So pause is post-acute withdrawal syndrome, and it refers to, I've spoken about withdrawal and when it ends, and this is a concept where a certain period after the main withdrawal, when you've been fine for weeks or months, suddenly this additional thing kicks in, and it's called post-acute withdrawal syndrome. It's almost like a withdrawal that kicks in. So it is incredibly vague. Okay, let me put that up front. When you try and research into it, it's anything between a few weeks and a few months or even years, depending on what study you're looking at. The symptoms are incredibly vague, like slight anxiety, depression, insomnia. Not that I'm belittling those things, but they can have many causes. I think there is a tendency for people, when they stop drinking, they would try and kind of blame everything on their drinking, not in a bad way, but it's like, if this happens 3 months down the line, is it to do with the fact I've stopped drinking? Fatigue and lack of motivation might be linked to something completely different. I mean, I'm 8.5 years sober, and I went through a very bad patch recently, and I couldn't be bothered to do anything. I was very tired and just feeling miserable all the time. It wasn't to do with the fact I'd stopped drinking 8 years ago. It was just what I call life. We go through good times and bad times, so it might be as simple as that. So as I say, I can't shed an awful lot. I mean, it may well be post-acute withdrawal syndrome, but as I say, there's no firm evidence on it. A lot of people talk about it, but they've not actually found any cohesive chemical physiological cause for it. It's all very theoretical at the moment. And as I say, there are other things that could cause that. And 4 months as well is extremely good. So, think about how your life's improved in other ways as well. But see if you get through it. I mean, even if it is post-acute withdrawal syndrome, it ends. So that's the one thing everyone does seem to agree on. So it may be a case of just having to grit your teeth and get through it. I'm doing alcohol-free cocktail making class tonight. That sounds good. If I have a few alcohol, I like this is a good one. If I have a few alcohol-free beers, I still wake up with a mild hangover, sugar hangover. So this is a really interesting one, this phantom hangover. You don't say where you have these. I kind of have very mild hangover symptoms sometimes if I go out for the evening and drink alcohol-free beers. And what I put it down to, a lot of the time when you go out, you will end up eating later than normal. You'll get to bed later than normal. You will be having alcohol-free beers, and they do have sugar in them. For me, I think that just interferes with my sleep. So instead of my usual going to bed at 9, and sleeping, I'm going to bed at midnight. I've just had a load of food. I don't sleep particularly well and just wake up just not feeling right. So I think there is something to be said to that, but I also think you can get some kind of endorphin thing where if you're out really enjoying yourself socializing, you can wake up the next day feeling a bit odd, and it might just be almost like an endorphin hangover. Nothing like a real hangover. Let me be absolutely clear on that. Nowhere near as awful as a hangover. So it could be that, but it is a real thing. These kind of phantom hangovers where you wake up just not feeling quite right. I replaced alcohol with chocolate. We need to be aware how much sugar is in alcohol. Yeah, I've heard this a few times. So there's a lot of sugar in alcohol. So when you give it up, you get like sugar cravings. And what I always say is, if you're in the first week, 2 weeks, whatever, and you're still recalibrating, your brain chemistry is getting back to normal, your sleep's getting back to normal, and you can't be bothered to look at your diet, I would say fine, cut yourself some slack, one thing at a time. But when you start to get on top of things, it is worth looking at, because to a lesser extent, but the same mechanism does still apply, in that things like emotional eating, it's overall a frustrating and unpleasant thing to do, and you're better off rid of it, exactly the same as with alcohol. I hope that was all right for everyone. It was nice to see you all. I think I prefer these live because I can actually see the questions. I prefer doing them on YouTube because I can see the questions and deal with them live, which makes it a bit more interesting. Have a good weekend, everyone, and I shall be back in 2 weeks. I've got Dave on. Dave's going to be my guest in a couple of weeks. I just need to work out how I will get him on this. And if I can't work it out, I might have to do it back in the Facebook group. But anyway, I'll be in contact. Have a good weekend, everyone. See you soon. Bye.